The plasma blast should have killed Henry Wheeler instantly. Instead, the 72-year-old gardener stood amidst his prized tomato plants, surrounded by a soft green glow that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. The alien soldiers hovering above his suburban garden froze in their tracks, their weapon systems cycling down with an audible whine. Henry just smiled and adjusted his dirt-stained gloves. "Well now," he said, reaching down to touch a tomato vine that had begun to spiral upward with unprecedented speed, "that's certainly different." The morning had started normally enough. He'd been out since dawn, tending to his vegetable garden just as he had every day since retiring from the high school science department 5 years ago. The alien ships appeared over major cities worldwide at precisely 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time, their angular forms casting strange shadows across the landscape. By 10:15, they had begun their attack, methodically targeting population centers with weapons that reduced buildings to ash. But something went wrong when they reached Pleasant Grove Senior Living Community. Their weapons, so devastating against steel and concrete, seemed to sputter and fade when directed at the residents' carefully tended gardens. And when they targeted Henry, working away in his backyard totally oblivious to the invasion, everything changed. The tomato vine had reached his shoulder now, its leaves spreading wider than any terrestrial plant had a right to grow. More remarkably, Henry could feel it somehow, not just the physical touch, but something deeper. A connection that sparked and hummed in the back of his mind like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered. "You know," he said conversationally to the dumbfounded aliens, "I always told my students that plants were smarter than we gave them credit for." He gestured to his garden, where every plant was now growing with visible speed, reaching toward the alien ships with purposeful intent. "Looks like I was right." The aliens' response was cut short by a startled screech from their command ship. Henry's neighbor, 83-year-old Rose Chen, had emerged onto her back porch with her prized orchids. The plants were glowing with the same green energy that surrounded Henry, their delicate blooms transforming into something both beautiful and unmistakably defensive. As warning sirens began to blare from the alien fleet, Henry couldn't help but chuckle. "I suppose you folks have never met a generation that spent their entire lives nurturing things and watching them grow." The tomato vine curled protectively around his shoulders, and he could have sworn he felt it laugh with him. "Maybe we should have a chat about the wisdom of underestimating gardeners." Above them, the alien ships began to retreat, their weapons powerless against this unexpected defense. But Henry knew this was just the beginning. He could feel it in the earth beneath his feet, in the plants reaching toward him with newfound awareness, and in the lifetime of patience and care that had unknowingly prepared him for this moment. The invasion had begun. But humanity's elders had an advantage no one could have predicted. Decades of giving life had granted them the power to protect it. News of what happened at Pleasant Grove spread faster than the alien invasion itself. Within hours, reports flooded in from retirement communities worldwide. Everywhere the aliens attacked, they encountered the same baffling defense. Gardens transformed into shields, houseplants into weapons, and every senior citizen with a green thumb became an unexpected warrior. Henry's backyard had become an impromptu command center. Rose Chen's orchids now formed a living canopy overhead, their blooms pulsing with energy that interfered with alien scanning technology. Below, his tomato plants had evolved into an intricate communication network, their vines carrying messages between the growing number of elderly gardeners gathering in his yard. "It's like they're talking to us," said Albert Thompson, an 89-year-old former botanist who had brought his collection of rare succulents. "Not with words, exactly, but with..." He waved his weathered hands, searching for the right description. "With memories," Henry finished. "They remember everything they've absorbed from us over the years. Every conversation over morning coffee, every worry shared while pruning, every triumph celebrated over a new bloom." The plants responded to his words, their leaves shivering with recognition. What had begun as a simple connection was growing stronger by the hour. Henry could now sense not just his own garden, but a vast network of green life spreading throughout the city. More remarkably, he could feel the same awareness awakening in other elderly gardeners as they discovered their new abilities. But the aliens weren't idle. Their ships had regrouped on the outskirts of town, and surveillance drones buzzed constantly overhead. Through the plant network, Henry received warnings from other communities. The invaders were specifically targeting places with high concentrations of senior citizens, as if they'd identified the source of their unexpected resistance. "They're afraid of us," Rose observed, gently touching one of her orchids. The flower turned toward her like a child seeking comfort. "Not just our new abilities, but our experience. Our patience." She was right. The aliens' tactics were aggressive but uncoordinated, lacking the strategic depth that only came with years of accumulated wisdom. They had superior technology, but they fought like creatures who had never learned the value of careful cultivation, of nurturing something over time. As evening approached, Henry felt a different kind of message propagate through the plant network, a pattern of growth and connection that sparked a memory from his teaching days. The plants weren't just defending them, they were trying to show them something. "Look at this," he called to the others, pointing to where his tomato vines had grown into an intricate spiral pattern. "It's not random. It's DNA," Albert breathed, his scientific training kicking in. "But not quite human, and not quite plant. Something in between." The revelation was interrupted by a high-pitched whine from above. A massive alien ship, different from the others, had positioned itself directly over Pleasant Grove. Its weapon systems powered up, glowing with an ominous purple light that made the air itself feel charged. But Henry wasn't afraid. He could feel the strength of every garden in the community flowing through the network, decades of love and care crystallizing into something the aliens couldn't hope to understand. He placed his hand on the nearest tomato vine, and all around the neighborhood, senior citizens did the same with their own plants. "Let's show them," he said quietly, "what a lifetime of helping things grow can really do." The alien ship fired, and the gardens of Pleasant Grove rose up to meet it. The purple beam split into fragments against a living wall of intertwined plants, each piece absorbed and transformed into nurturing energy that only made the barrier grow stronger. Across Pleasant Grove, senior citizens watched in amazement as their lifetime of gardening knowledge transformed into tactical expertise they never knew they had. "The petunias work best for disrupting their scanning," Henry explained to a group of newcomers, his voice carrying the same patient tone he'd used with countless students. "Orchids can interfere with their communications, and vegetables, especially root vegetables, are perfect for defense." The alien ship retreated, but not before Henry caught a glimpse of something through the plant network, a flash of emotion from their attackers. Not anger or frustration, but something that felt almost like recognition. He didn't have time to dwell on it. Through the ever-expanding network of gardens, reports were coming in from around the world. In Japan, elderly caretakers of ancient bonsai trees had turned their miniature forests into impenetrable barriers. Community gardens in Mexico City had evolved into communication hubs, their ancient corn varieties reaching back to ancestral memories of survival. In Kenya, traditional healers found their medicinal plants responding to thoughts as well as touch. "We're all connected now," Rose observed, watching as her orchids transmitted messages faster than any internet. Every garden, every pot on every windowsill, every wild plant that's ever been tended by caring hands. The younger generations had found their roles too. Teenagers helped map the growing plant network using gaming strategies. Middle-aged adults provided logistics, turning garden centers into supply hubs and transforming senior communities into fortified sanctuaries. Children, with their natural ability to accept the miraculous, became invaluable translators between humans and the rapidly evolving plant intelligence. But it was the elderly who formed the heart of what the media had dubbed the Garden Army. Their decades of accumulated wisdom proved to be the key to unlocking the plant's full potential. Every failure they'd learned from, every season's patterns they'd observed, every patient hour spent nurturing life, it all had meaning now. Henry found himself teaching again, but instead of high school science, he was showing other seniors how to extend their consciousness through root systems and communicate using patterns of growth. It's like social media, he explained to one confused group, but with photosynthesis instead of phones. The aliens changed tactics, targeting power plants and infrastructure instead of direct confrontation with the gardens. But they hadn't counted on the resourcefulness of people who'd lived through countless challenges. Solar panels were quickly covered with transparent vines that enhanced their efficiency. Water treatment plants were protected by algae that could purify water faster than any human technology. As Henry coordinated these efforts from his expanding garden command center, that nagging feeling about the aliens' reaction grew stronger. During every confrontation, the plant network picked up complex emotions from their attackers, not just surprise or fear, but something deeper. Something that felt like urgent purpose. "They're not just attacking randomly," he said to Albert one evening, watching the alien ships circle overhead in new patterns. "They're testing us. Learning our capabilities. But not like an invader studying an enemy. More like someone making sure we're ready," Albert finished, his scientific mind picking up the same patterns. But ready for what? Before Henry could respond, every plant in the garden suddenly went rigid. Through the network came a sensation no one had felt before, a vast approaching shadow that made the alien ships seem tiny in comparison. And with it, a message from the plants themselves, encoded in decades of shared memories. They were never the real threat. They came to prepare us. Above them, the alien ships began forming new configurations, no longer threatening but protective. And in the depths of space, something ancient and hungry turned its attention toward Earth. The alien commander stood in Henry's garden, her iridescent skin reflecting the gentle glow of the enhanced plants. Through the root network, Henry could sense her anxiety, a sharp, metallic taste that contrasted with the rich, organic flow of plant communications. "We call them the Void Eaters," she explained, her translator struggling with concepts that seemed to pain her. "They consume worlds. Not just the physical matter, but the memories, the accumulated wisdom, the very essence of life itself." Rose's orchids shivered at the description, spreading a wave of unease through the garden network. Around the world, elderly gardeners felt their plants react to the approaching threat with ancient, deep-rooted fear. "But why attack us?" Albert asked, his scientific curiosity overshadowing his initial distrust. "Why not just tell us?" The alien, who had introduced herself with a sound like rustling leaves that the plants translated as "nurture of distant light," gestured to the thriving garden around them. "Your world is unique. Most civilizations advance by replacing organic systems with technology. But here..." She touched a tomato vine with something like reverence. "Here, your elders maintained your connection to the root networks. You never lost the old wisdom." Henry understood. Every gardener knew that patience couldn't be rushed, that some lessons could only be learned through seasons of growth and change. "You needed to shock us into awakening these abilities quickly." "Yes," Nurture admitted. "The Void Eaters approach faster than any natural development would allow. We apologize for the trauma of our methods. But your world's survival depends on the full awakening of this potential." Through the plant network, Henry received images from around the globe. The alien ships were sharing their technology freely now, helping to strengthen the organic defense systems that had emerged. In the Amazon, indigenous elders worked with alien scientists to amplify the rainforest's vast mycological network. In the Netherlands, floating gardens merged with alien energy systems to create new forms of sustainable power. Everywhere, the wisdom of age combined with both terrestrial and extraterrestrial innovation. But it wasn't enough. Henry could feel it through the deepest roots, the approaching entity was vast beyond comprehension. Their current defenses, even enhanced by alien technology, wouldn't be sufficient. "There's something we're missing," he mused, walking through his garden with Rose and Albert. "The plants keep trying to show us something about DNA, about patterns of life itself. Rose stopped suddenly, her hand on one of her orchids. "Perhaps we're thinking too small," she said. "We've been focused on defending individual gardens, individual communities. But what if?" The plant network lit up with understanding before she could finish. Every garden on Earth resonated with the idea, a symphony of photosynthesis and purpose. The aliens' instruments registered massive spikes in organic energy as the concept spread through root systems and flowered in countless minds. "The entire planet," Albert whispered. "Not separate gardens defending their patches, but one unified system. A global garden." Henry felt the rightness of it in his bones, in the soil beneath his feet, in every lesson he'd ever taught about ecosystems and interconnectedness. But he also felt the immensity of the challenge. To coordinate every plant, every gardener, every alien technology into a single harmonious network. "We'll need everyone," he said. "Not just the gardeners and the aliens. Every human being who's ever loved watching things grow." Nurture's instruments beeped urgently. "The Void Eaters have entered your solar system. We have less than 3 days." Henry looked at his friends, at the garden that had become so much more than a retirement hobby, at the alien allies who had risked everything to prepare them for this moment. He thought of every lesson failure had taught him, every small victory that had shown him the way forward, every student who had reminded him that teaching was just another form of gardening. "Then we'd better get planting," he said, and reached for the nearest tomato vine. The next 48 hours transformed Earth in ways no one could have imagined. Every park became a command center, every window box a communication hub, every blade of grass a sensor in an emerging planetary defense grid. The elderly led the way, their lifetime of accumulated wisdom proving essential to managing the explosive growth of enhanced plant life. Henry barely slept, his consciousness expanded through the global network. Through the plants, he could feel the approaching Void Eaters, a vast emptiness that made the spaces between stars seem crowded. But he could also feel something else, something the plants had been trying to tell them since the beginning. "Look at this," he called to Albert and Nurture, pointing to where his tomato vines had grown into an intricate double helix. "They're not just showing us DNA. They're showing us how to change it." Nurture's instruments hummed as she studied the pattern. "Impossible," she breathed, her translator struggling with her excitement. "Your plants aren't just communicating, they're evolving. Actively rewriting their own genetic code based on accumulated memories. Memories spanning millions of years," Albert added, his scientific mind racing. "Every adaptation, every survival strategy plants have ever developed. And every lesson we've taught them," Rose finished, entering the garden with her orchids swaying in anticipation. "Every garden we've tended, every crop we've cultivated, every flower we've helped bloom." They remembered it all. Through the network, Henry felt understanding blossom in gardens worldwide. The aliens hadn't just been preparing humanity for the Void Eaters, they'd been providing the final key needed to unlock Earth's own ancient defense system. A system that had been developing since the first human decided to nurture a plant rather than simply harvest it. But there was a cost. The plants were clear about that. To activate a defense grid of this magnitude, to rewrite the genetic code of an entire planet's flora in mere hours, would require more than just alien technology or human wisdom. It would require a complete merger of consciousness, human, plant, and alien alike. "Every gardener on Earth will need to fully connect to the network," Henry explained to the hastily assembled Global Council. "Not just communicating through it, but becoming part of it. We might not be able to come back from that." The council chamber, located in what had been the United Nations building but was now almost completely overtaken by enhanced plants, fell silent. The implications were clear. They were asking millions of elderly people to essentially sacrifice their individual consciousness to become part of a planetary mind. Then Rose stood up, her orchids glowing with quiet determination. "I've spent my entire life helping things grow," she said. "If my last act is to become part of the greatest garden ever grown, I can think of no better way to go." One by one, other elderly gardeners voiced their agreement. They had lived long enough to know that endings were just another form of beginning, that sacrifice in service of life was no sacrifice at all. Through the plant network, Henry felt the Void Eaters approaching the orbit of Mars. Their presence was like a shadow falling across his consciousness, a hunger that threatened to devour not just matter and energy, but the very memory of existence itself. But he also felt something else, the readiness of millions of gardeners, their lifetimes of wisdom ready to merge with billions of years of plant evolution. He felt the aliens' technology humming in harmony with Earth's awakening defenses. And beneath it all, he felt the deep, patient strength that had allowed green things to survive everything from ice ages to industrial revolutions. 24 hours until they reach Earth, Nurture announced, her instruments pulsing with urgent light. Henry looked at his friends, at the garden that had become a window into a larger universe, at the sky that would soon host either their greatest victory or final defeat. He thought of every seed he'd ever planted, every student he'd ever taught, every small act of nurturing that had led to this moment. "Then let's show them," he said, his voice carrying through the root network to every garden on Earth, "what happens when you threaten a well-tended garden." The moment of merging began at dawn. Around the world, elderly gardeners settled among their plants, their minds opening to the vast green consciousness that had been growing beneath the surface of everyday reality. Henry sat in his garden, Rose and Albert beside him, as the enhanced tomato vines gently wrapped around their hands. Rather like falling asleep, Rose murmured as her consciousness began to expand. Her orchids pulsed with soft light, their colors shifting through spectrums human eyes had never seen before. Or perhaps like waking up. Through the emerging planetary network, Henry felt others joining, millions of elderly minds bringing their accumulated wisdom into the green vastness. Each person carried their own garden of memories, victory gardens that had sustained families through hard times, window boxes that had brightened city lives, herb gardens that had healed and nourished, flowers tended through grief and joy in every shade of life between. The aliens, led by Nurture, provided the technological framework that prevented the human consciousness from being overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of planetary awareness. Their ships formed a protective web in Earth's orbit, channeling energy to support the unprecedented merger of minds and helping to direct the rapid evolution of Earth's flora. As his individual awareness began to dissolve into the greater whole, Henry understood at last what the plants had been trying to tell them. The Void Eaters weren't just a physical threat, they were the ultimate expression of disconnection, of life turned against itself. Earth's defense wouldn't just be a battle, it would be a demonstration of a fundamental truth, that all life was connected, that wisdom grew best when it was shared, that strength came not from dominance but from nurturing. The transformation of Earth's biosphere accelerated. Trees that had stood sentinel for centuries burst into new forms of growth, their branches reaching toward space like living antennae. Grasslands became vast neural networks, processing and distributing information faster than any computer. The oceans bloomed with enhanced algae that could manipulate energy on a quantum level. And through it all, the accumulated wisdom of millions of elderly minds provided the guidance that kept the growth from becoming chaos. Every lesson learned from decades of gardening, every insight gained from long experience, became part of Earth's emerging defense. Albert's scientific knowledge helped direct the genetic modifications spreading through the plant network. Rose's careful attention to detail ensured no part of the system was overlooked. And Henry's lifetime of teaching helped coordinate it all, turning individual actions into coordinated purpose. They were no longer quite themselves, but they weren't quite gone either. Their consciousness had become like the plants they'd tended, rooted in individual experience but connected to something vast and shared. Through this expanded awareness, they felt the Void Eaters enter the upper atmosphere. The entities were more terrible than anything their limited human minds could have comprehended, vast geometries of hunger that consumed meaning itself. But now, joined with the green mind of Earth and supported by alien technology, they could see the pattern of it. More importantly, they could see its flaw. They feed on separation, Henry's voice echoed through the network, both words and pure thought. On the illusion that life can be divided, categorized, consumed piece by piece. Then let's show them something different, Rose's consciousness added, her lifetime of nurturing flowers becoming part of Earth's response. Something that grows, Albert's mind contributed, his scientific understanding merging with ancient plant wisdom. Through their shared awareness, they felt the rest of humanity watching in awe as the planet itself began to change. The enhanced plants were no longer individual organisms but part of a single vast entity, guided by the merged consciousness of Earth's most experienced gardeners and fed by the power of alien science. The Void Eaters descended, their hunger reaching toward the suddenly transformed Earth. And the Garden of Humanity bloomed to meet them. The Void Eaters struck with incomprehensible force, their presence bending reality as they sought to consume Earth's essence. But instead of finding a world fragmented and vulnerable, they encountered something unprecedented, a planet unified by the patient wisdom of its eldest gardeners, the ancient knowledge of its plants, and the protective technology of its alien allies. Where the Void Eaters tried to create separation, they found only deeper connection. Every attempt to consume was met with growth. Every attack aimed at division was answered with unity. The merged consciousness of millions of elderly gardeners guided Earth's response with the careful attention of those who had spent lifetimes nurturing growing things. Through the vast network of enhanced plants, Henry felt his individual memories becoming part of something greater. His years of teaching science had taught him that the most powerful forces in nature were not those that destroyed, but those that created, connected, grew. Now that lesson was being demonstrated on a planetary scale. Rose's lifetime of careful observation helped the network anticipate the Void Eaters' patterns. Albert's scientific curiosity revealed new ways to adapt and respond. And through it all, the aliens' technology helped channel and focus Earth's unprecedented transformation. The battle raged across multiple dimensions, visible to the untransformed humans below as spectacular lights in the sky and impossible patterns of growth across the Earth's surface. But in the deeper reality where the true conflict took place, it was more like a conversation between fundamentally opposed ways of existing. The Void Eaters represented entropy, separation, the breaking down of all things into consumable parts. Earth's defense, guided by the wisdom of age and the patience of those who had spent lifetimes helping things grow, represented something else, the fundamental interconnectedness of all living things. You can't consume what never ends, Henry's consciousness rippled through the network. You can't divide what was never truly separate. The merged minds of Earth's gardeners shared not just their knowledge but their understanding, that every end contained a beginning, that death was part of life's cycle, that wisdom wasn't about accumulating power but about nurturing potential. The Void Eaters' assault began to falter as they encountered something they had never faced before, a world that refused to be consumed because it had learned to constantly renew itself. Every attack they launched was transformed into energy for new growth. Every attempt to create entropy was met with evolution. Through the network, Henry felt the moment the tide turned. The Void Eaters' hunger met something it couldn't devour, the simple, profound wisdom of those who had learned that true strength lay not in taking, but in giving. Not in consuming, but in nurturing. Not in separating, but in connecting. The entities that had devoured countless worlds found themselves transformed by contact with Earth's unified consciousness. Their hunger was not destroyed but changed, their desire to consume transformed into a desire to connect. As the Void Eaters retreated, carrying with them a new understanding of existence, the merged consciousness of Earth's gardeners had a choice to make. They could remain part of the planetary network they had created, or they could return to their individual selves. Both, Rose's consciousness suggested, with the wisdom of one who had tended complex gardens. Like any well-designed garden, we can be both individual and connected. The aliens' technology helped facilitate the transition. Gradually, the elderly gardeners returned to their individual awareness while maintaining a deeper connection to the enhanced plant network they had helped create. They had given humanity a great gift, proof that the wisdom of age, combined with the power of nurturing life, could overcome any challenge. Henry opened his eyes in his garden, once again primarily himself but forever changed by the experience of being part of something greater. His tomato plants, now gently glowing with enhanced life, reached out to welcome him back. "Well," he said, looking at Rose and Albert as they too returned to themselves, "I suppose this gives a whole new meaning to Senior Activities Program." Around the world, elderly gardeners found themselves honored not just as heroes who had saved Earth, but as teachers who could show younger generations the profound truth they had learned, that wisdom grows best when shared, that strength comes from connection, and that the most powerful force in the universe is not the ability to destroy, but the choice to nurture life in all its forms. The aliens, led by Nurture, established permanent diplomatic relations with Earth, eager to learn more from a world that had transformed an invasion into an opportunity for growth. And in gardens everywhere, enhanced plants continued to grow, connecting communities and reminding humanity that its greatest strength lay not in walls that divided, but in the wisdom that chose to help life flourish. As for Henry, he kept teaching, no longer just science, but the deeper lessons he had learned, that every person, like every plant, had the potential to grow into something extraordinary. All they needed was patience, care, and the accumulated wisdom of those who had spent their lives helping things grow.